on a sort of emotional, spiritual level, I feel a confirmation that this work is really powerful and really valuable. That's 100% clear to me. I mean, it was my hunch before when I trained and practiced, and then I did your training and the work with you, and I feel like, hell yes, this is absolutely great stuff. It's, you know, it's as powerful as psychedelics, but much more orderly, and which is my other power tool, psychedelics. But this is work that is both structured and highly imaginative. So I'm sort of blown away by those two aspects of it. In terms of my own application of the work, I've become more rigorous with detail. I've learned that from you. I gather more information from my clients. I take it more sort of seriously and more literally, if that makes any sense. It's less floaty, very good on intuition and moving around, and very good on empathy, but that doesn't lead as much now. I think maybe I'm a bit more scientific in my approach, which isn't necessarily a bad thing given the way that I skew. So it's really great for me to have I feel like more of a sort of rigorous and defined working model, as well as more validation on an experiential level, that working in the transpersonal realm, working with personal symbols is the bee's knees, to use one of the phrases we like. It is, to me, it's the most exciting thing, because that's poetry. You know, to get into the world of universal symbols is, gosh, why does it excite me so much? I don't know. Maybe you have an idea.
Meaning and purpose. You know, we are meaning-making machines. It brings a kind of fizz and excitement and a depth to us. And what a privilege it is to be working as a EMDR therapist with clients who bring these extraordinary stories, and we can really make a difference.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that's brings me to two more things I want to touch on. Okay. Epigenetics, the idea that we can work on something that has happened in the past that was highly traumatic and actually shift things on an epigenetic level. So I know you and I wound up doing some work where this was not intentional, but all roads lead to Rome. We ended up talking about my grandfather's assassination, which was a radically traumatic event. My grandfather was stabbed to death when my mother was just a small child, and it was a terrible trauma. And you know, it's hard without really kind of getting familiar with this work to really sort of see how directly that informs your whole nervous system. But when you do the work, you see, oh, it does. And the experience of being able to process some of that shock and grief that has been passed down epigenetically. And I don't know if I've completely put it to rest, but certainly in that experience I had with you, I felt like I really, you know, calmed something down deep in my nervous system. And my hope is that in turn would also help my mother and my grandmother who's passed, and then also my daughters. And I mean, I think it goes in both directions. What do you think?
Absolutely. One of the things that two key things perhaps to flag up in answering that really very important observation. One is that we talked about magic earlier on, and in a sense, human beings have known through the millennia since written records began that stories, spells, if you like, that are cast on a particular generation or an individual get passed down the line. The Bible, in phrases, pieces written up to 5,000 years ago, has the phrase in Genesis that the sins of the father are passed down to the third and the fourth generations. I think it says there. And so many wisdom traditions and religious traditions throughout human history have this idea that the concepts are different in the different traditions, but the idea is like a spell or an evil spirit or whatever that gets passed down, that gets cast. Think of fairy tales that have the metaphors in most cultures. The idea of a spell is very central to the human experience. We now understand that these spells, as they used to be understood, are sort of neurobiological patterns that are burned into the system, which can actually be released. They are scientifically understandable. They're not external, when I don't understand them as evil spirits out there, but through history, cultures have found ways of working with these stories that get handed down to release them so they don't continue to haunt the present by understanding them as evil spirits might be cast out, exorcisms and so on. But of course we now know, and Rachel Yehuda in New York is doing amazing work on the epigenetic transmission of trauma sensitivity down through the generations. She's worked with Holocaust survivors and families of, and with 9/11 people who were exposed to 9/11 in New York. And there's a very clear scientific marker. Epigenetics is you have our genes, and then the epigenetics is how the genes then fire and wire. And it's definitely clear that some of this is passed down in epigenetic form, but of course a huge amount is passed down in terms of what Richard Dawkins would call memes, cultural ways things are talked about and communicated with children. So we're soaked in the stories, genetic and cultural and family and group and identity. We're soaked in this. We're marinated in these stories as in childhood. And the brilliance with EMDR, with attachment-informed EMDR, with what I call the intergenerational approach, the intergenerational protocol. I hate the word protocol because it sounds like just what you do out of a box, and it's the same with everybody. We go in and we actually invite the client, as it were, we go into the client's childhood story, and we invite them to imagine their mother, their father, their formative attachment figures, having their experience. They might be shouting at the child, they might be divorcing, having relational difficulties, the sort of stories that we explored. But then we sit in the client's imagination, we sit the mother down, and the client is my interpreter, and I sit in front of her, of the mother or the father, in the client's imagination. And then through the client, through the adult client, not the child client, through the adult client, we then ask the mother, the introject, as we say in the psychodynamic jargon, we ask the mother to drop back into her childhood, or the father to drop back into his childhood. And then we might go further back, and we find, your grandfather having the experience of violence and the impact on the family system. And it really is, Jane, isn't it? It's weird. When client says that's weird, we know EMDR is working. It's true. It really is true. We release these intergenerational, these sort of generational stories. You could get very woo-woo about it, but I think it's actually in the quantum experience of the nervous system that these stories are still resonating, and we release them. We give permission to the old stories. Hey, you've done your bit. It's been carried with survival-informed intent. It's okay, guys. You can go now. And thanks for all your hard work over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the deepest kind of experiential narrative therapy.
It's about as deep as it goes. I was working with a couple of Jewish clients recently, and one of them, we went back to the, because I love working with Jewish clients because there's just so much history, and there's Jewish mothers, there's all the cliches, well, most of which are true. And we went back to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70 with one client. With another Jewish client, we found ourselves with Moses in Egypt. I mean, please. It was when we realized that was where we needed to do the healing, because these two clients were carrying these stories in their DNA, and we released something that needed to be released.